Hello everyone, this is Tanya from Professor Tanya Speaks, and today we're going to be talking about storytelling. Today will be the first of a 4-part series on how to tell a brilliant story for your speech, or just to tell a story maybe for sales or for anywhere that you need to tell a story. So the focus is going to be on the oral part of storytelling. Even though we will be talking about how to write the story, this is not for a fiction or, a short story. This is really the type of story that you would tell on its own orally or as the prelude to the speech that you could be giving. Did I say given? Yeah, giving. So it's going to be in 4 parts. The first part, which is today, will be the components of a good story. What makes a good story? Then we're going to talk about how to find stories from our lives. Then we're going to talk about how to actually craft the stories, how to bring it together so it has great impact. And then we're going to talk about how to deliver the story so that our body language is congruent with what we say, and so that we will convince our audience that what we're talking about really is what we mean. So let's now begin by first talking about what makes a good story. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but every now and again you read or listen to or watch a movie and you walk away and you say, oh, what a good story. I think we've all said it at some stage, but maybe we've never stopped to think about what it is that made it great. So before I decided to do this video, about an hour ago, I made a note of what I thought were the best things or the best parts of a good story, what made a good story. So maybe when I'm done with my list, you will have other things to add. But what I can tell you is that based on my research, I believe these are the necessary elements. There may be more, but I believe you need these essential parts. Now, what I believe is that a good story has 4 features that make it a good story. The first thing is the structure. It has to have the right structure. The next thing is that the story has to have a few elements. The third thing is that the story has to be authentic. And the fourth thing is that it has to be strategic. Now I'm going to talk about each of the 4 parts. And as I talk about these parts, feel free to stop the video and to reflect and think about the last story that you told or you wrote for a speech. And I want you to think and try to figure out what you did or what you could have done differently. Okay, so the first thing is the structure. Every good story must have a particular structure, which I mentioned in this video where I told you that a story must have 3 parts. In Hollywood, they sometimes call it 3 acts, but we're not talking about fiction in Hollywood. But a lot of the principles are the same anyway. A story must have at least 3 parts so that the structure is intact. When people listen to your story, they must hear the beginning, they must hear a middle, and they must hear an end. You must have the 3 parts. They should be able to differentiate the 3 parts. Like I said, the first part is the beginning, when you set the stage. Then there is the middle part where an incident occurs. There has to be an identifiable incident. Because a story is a weak story if it doesn't have an incident that causes some kind of conflict. There must be a conflict, there must be a struggle. If you don't have that struggle, it is not a story. It's just maybe a summary of events. It may just be a feel-good thing, but a story must have the struggle. And then you must have the ending where you have the resolution. You must have those three parts. So that's the first thing that makes a good story. It is structurally sound. The next thing is that a good story, must have about 5 elements. It has to have an identifiable, relatable hero who goes on a journey and faces a challenge. So, hero, challenge, and at some point there's going to be a significant moment during this challenge. The hero is then going to have a struggle. There has to be a struggle. Then the hero has to learn a worthy lesson. And all of this must be within a setting with specific details. All of that. Dun, 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 dun. You have to have all of that. Now, when I'm done with the other 2 points, I'll return to this one because this one needs a little bit more elaboration, but I want to first take you through each part. Now, the third section, or the third thing you need to think about when you are putting together your story, is that a story must have authentic emotions. The speaker or the hero or the protagonist or the main character must experience authentic emotions, and we must hear about those emotions. You must show us over telling us those emotions, and we must experience those emotions too. So emotions and authenticity are necessary. And when I say authentic, I really mean authentic, because it does not make sense where you're trying to give emotions which really don't exist. And it must be authentic. For whatever the situation is, it has to be authentic. Let's say you had an experience in your story where a stranger, for example, said something like, "You're so ugly." God forbid that would happen. Now, if the person said you were ugly and you never saw the person before and you were telling the story and you did, "Oh my God, he said I was ugly. I can't believe it. Oh my God, I will never, oh my God." No, seriously? A stranger said you were ugly. A stranger that you'll never see again. That would not seem like authentic emotion. And if we heard you, we'd probably be thinking, okay, maybe there's a little bit of mental illness here. So it has to be authentic. And it has to be genuine. Okay, so that's number 3. And then number 4 is it has to be strategic, because it has to spark the imagination of the audience, where we listen, and based on that, and based on the emotion, it touches us so much that it stays with us. And that's what happens when you leave the movie theater and you're still talking about it. And the next day, You post it, well, you post it on Facebook from on your way home because, oh my God, it was so good. Of course, this was before COVID, right? But when it stays with you and it has that kind of impact, something was done right. Something was done right. So we say it needs to spark the audience's imagination and cause them to relate to the situation. And that's why it has to be an identifiable, relatable character. Because we naturally, as we listen, should be thinking, yeah, I understand that. I can imagine what that would be like. Even if that didn't quite happen to you, you can relate to it. I know what it is like. Like when I spoke about failure. You should be able to say, yeah, maybe I didn't fail like Tanya where I wanted to get into medicine, but I know what it is like to chase a dream for years, or not necessarily for years, but to be so connected to a thought as it becomes such a part of your life that one day it changes and it leaves you feeling wide open for a while. I've been there, I've done that. And that's why it needs to be relatable. So, to recap, it has to have the right structure. It has to have a few elements, 5 elements. It has to be authentic. The emotion has to be authentic and the telling has to be authentic, and it has to be strategic, where it creates curiosity on the part of the audience, and they should be able to relate to it. Now I'm going to talk a little bit now about the elements part, because this is very important. Because you need to look at your stories that you have written and you need to figure out if you have the elements. The first element is it has to have a relatable character. A story is a good story when we can relate to the person. And if you tell us a story of a superwoman or a superman or a superhuman who's just so perfect, that's not relatable. Tell us about someone with flaws, and that's relatable because we all have flaws. We don't necessarily go around showing them, but that's the thing about a story, it shines a light on us, right? So a story must have a relatable character. And that's why when I spoke about speeches being universal, stories must have a universal touch. The thing that makes it universal is that it is everybody experiences those things. Like I said, everybody experiences the 6 emotions: sorrow, joy, anger. We all experience that. So make sure that your hero, which in the case of a personal story is yourself, and when I say hero, it's any gender, okay guys? It's not just he. It's just easier to say he sometimes, or she. But whatever, whoever the person is, they have to be relatable. So we say a relatable hero who faces a challenge. There has to be a challenge in the story. No challenge, no story. Let me repeat. No challenge, no story. There has to be a challenge. And the challenge can be anything. You lose your job and you need to pay your rent. You need to forgive someone and you don't know how to forgive the person. You broke up with your boyfriend and then you see him tomorrow with a girl and you need to go to a wedding and he's going to be there. That's a challenge. You know, you want to do your driving test and it's snowing on that day and you have to get the test done because of whatever reason. That's a challenge. Or I'm reading a book now and the guy is dyslexic. And the partner to be loves books. That's a challenge. So the challenge can be anything, small or big, but there has to be an obstacle. And in the story, we have to hear and learn about this obstacle. It can't just be everything is hunky-dory, life is good. No. And that's why I said that when I told you guys about the first time that I went to Disney, and I went with my friend's family, my family and her family went. I spoke about it in this video. And I said, we did this, we went to Busch Gardens, we went to Lion Country Safari, we did. That is not a story. That was just me telling you events, and that's a summary. Because nothing happened. I told you about no challenge, no struggle. So it's not a story. So remember, there has to be an identifiable character who meets a challenge. And that challenge causes the emotional reaction, which I spoke about in another video, where I said there must be an emotional reaction. An emotional reaction doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be great. It could just be disappointment. It could be regret. It could be frustration. It could be slight happiness. It could be a feeling of despair, but there has to be an emotion. So it has to be around an emotional event. The next thing we also said is that there has to be a struggle. It can't just be, here's our problem, I fixed it, okay, life is good, kumbaya, life is great. No, we have to hear of the struggle. And the struggle isn't necessarily a fist fight. A struggle could just be, am I good enough? Am I really good enough? Why is this happening to me? Remember when I did the story about my son who nearly died after he was born. After my husband went off to the hospital, to the second hospital with the ambulance, my struggle, my inner struggle was, why? Why me? Why no? Why? That's a struggle. It couldn't just be. Now I knew when I was telling you the story, I knew it was a happy ending. But if I didn't tell you that struggle, if I just said, this happened, we couldn't find an ambulance. Oh, and then we found the ambulance. Yay! He's 23 years old next month. Whoa! No. I have to tell you the struggle. And I have to reveal my emotions. I have to tell you how I was feeling. And that's another thing sometimes people don't want to do. You have to be willing to tell us your emotions so that we can understand those authentic emotions. And then the person learns a lesson, a worthy lesson, which I said in this video, the takeaway. At the end of the story, we must understand your takeaway. It's your takeaway. Now you remember in this video, I spoke about going to my son's friend's father's funeral. And when I got to the funeral, I realized it was in Korean. I hadn't thought about it before, even though I knew his parents were Korean. I was just being, that's how we sometimes are, where we think we see the world through our lens only. So I went happily to the funeral to be supportive. And when I got the wedding, the funeral program, I thought, oh my God, it's in Korean. I turned to my husband, I tell him, and he says, what do you expect? So I'm in the church and I'm feeling like, wow, I can't even understand what's happening. And I felt like that until I heard the wife scream, wail. And when I heard her wail, I knew I was going to cry next. So I sat and I started to go through my handbag looking for tissue. And there am I saying, where's the tissue? Where's the tissue? Where's the tissue? Because I felt the tears coming. And then I felt a tap on my shoulder and I spun around. There was a little Korean woman holding out a box of Kleenex for me. And that's when I lost it and I started crying. And my takeaway was, pain is universal. It doesn't matter what language you speak. And even if you don't understand the language being spoken, you can sense pain. You can feel pain. It's universal. But you have to be clear about the takeaway, because if you are not clear about the takeaway, neither will your audience be. So there must be a takeaway, and all of this must happen within a setting with specific details. Now, when we talk about crafting the story, we'll go into this a little bit more to show you how to craft the story so that you take into account all of these elements. So to summarize, a good story must have the correct structure where there are 3 parts: beginning, middle with an event, and the end. Structure. The next thing is that it has to have 5 necessary elements. There has to be a relatable identifiable hero who faces a challenge and has a significant moment, experiences an honest struggle, learns a worthy lesson, and it happens in a setting with specific details. Now, when I say specific details, I remember in Michelle Obama's book when she was talking about her children going off to school for the first time when they were in the White House, and she spoke about their little faces being pressed up against the window in the car. That's what we call a specific detail, because everybody reading that can relate to that. If you've never had a child, you may have seen a child either in real life or in a movie, because children always do that. They're press their little faces against the glass. That's what we mean when we say specific details. And apart from the elements, it has to be authentic. That's the third thing. Authentic, with authentic emotions. And the fourth thing, it has to be strategic so that it sparks curiosity and imagination in the audience, the reader, the listeners, whoever, so that when they also experience the story, they can relate to the situation in the story. Now, your task is to look at your stories and go through those 4 things I spoke about and see how much of that is in your story. Be honest. And if you don't want to do it, give it to a friend. If you're in my class, if you've made a connection with somebody in the class, ask somebody in the class and say, how much of this did you see in my story? So, I hope you learned something from this, guys, and I hope you found some nuggets that will help you to create and craft your story. But don't worry. In the next video, we're going to be talking about where and how to find your stories. So, keep thinking about what you need to do to make your story good, and see what you need to work on. Because maybe from these 4 elements, these 4 areas, you're strong in one, but you're not as strong in another. I know for me, when it comes to specific details, that is my greatest weakness. That is my greatest weakness. I keep forgetting the specific details. I have to really make an effort and say, okay, Tanya, find somewhere to put some specific details. No, I don't know why, but as I feel I'm a storyteller, but when it comes to details, in general, I'm just not a detailed person. And I think it's a carryover. So I have to really make an effort to have specific details. You also need to figure out what you need to do so that you can find the thing that you need to work on the most. So please, I hope this helps, guys, and I hope you have found something that you can work with. So until I see you in the next video, bye for now, and let's make those stories great. Talk to you soon.